I've spent a lot of time ensuring that I provide the best quality in my content. This means in addition to great screen recordings, providing great quality audio as well as great video. A key component in my video are two Elgato key lights. There they are, and in this lesson I will show you how I've automated them to be controlled from my terminal, which is where I spend most of my time. So let's go. Now before we begin, you first need to find out the IP address of the lights that you want to control. There are lots of ways to do this, but the simplest one is to go into your router options, find the two that have the MAC address starting with 3C6A9D and note down their IP addresses. Additionally, you might need to provide static IP addresses to these particular lights, as we do not want to dynamically search for lights in our code. Once you have the IP address, you can run a command within your terminal to make sure that the rest of the automation that we are going to do is going to work. Here we are making an HTTP request with the method put and a JSON payload where the key item to note down is that value on we are setting to 0. And we are making the request to the IP address that we noted from our previous step. Nothing else is important right now. If you run this command, then the light should switch off. And now if you run the same command, but this time toggle the on value to be 1, the light will switch on. Now let's talk about some of the other items within the payload. Number of lights is something that always seems to be 1, and it's probably something that exists for some future expansion. Brightness is something that takes a value from 3 to 100 and it matches the values that you find within the Elgato control center. Now the temperature field is a bit weird. 143 seems to map to 7000 Kelvin and 344 seems to map to 2900 Kelvin within the Elgato control center. Now if you consider yourself a bash aficionado, you could definitely create a bash script that variabilizes some of these parameters and run with it. But of course, we're going to use NodeJS. Now because this application is pretty simple, I will not bore you with the details of every single piece of setup. But here we have the light service isolated where we import Axios, which is what I'm going to be using for my HTTP calls. I have isolated the key light options, which are on 0, 1, brightness 3 to 100 and temperature 143 to 344. Then we have a setLight utility function that invokes that /Elgato/lights endpoint with the payload matching what Elgato expects. And if the response is 200, we are fine, otherwise we log an error to the console. Now instead of exposing this low-level setLight function, I've got two utility functions which I export. First one called on, which takes the IP, the brightness and the temperature, and a function called off, which only takes the IP address. Now we can start using these on-off functions to control our lights, but before we do that, I'll show you how I've set this project up so that you can use it as an executable from your terminal. To create a binary called lights, we've added this section within package.json with bin lights pointing to lib/index.js. So when we run npm i-g on this project, it'll actually set up this lights executable globally and execute this lib/index.js. Now this index.js will actually be generated from our TypeScript source code, which is source src/index.ts. And this file simply invokes the main function from our main file with the argument that you will pass in on the command line. And that's it. With this infrastructure in place, now we will look at the main file that you can modify to control lights for your own specific workspace. We bring in the on and off functions from the light service that we saw before, and we have our main async function where we assume that the default scene will be on. We provide the IP addresses for the key and the fill light, and the temperature, which I like to be extremely warm, so 344. And then we toggle between the scenes. If the scene is on, then I set up my key with the high brightness and the fill with a slightly lower brightness. And then if the scene is off, I switch both of those lights off. Otherwise, I simply log to the console that an unknown scene has been passed in. You can feel free to add as many more scenes as you want. So now when you clone this project, the first thing that you need to do, of course, is to run npm install to make sure that it has all the dependencies, and then run npm i-g to link this global lights executable so that you can use it from anywhere within your terminal. And now for the moment of truth. Lights off. Lights on. Lights off. Lights with the default setting. And that's all for this lesson. Smash that like and leave a comment if you enjoyed this. Subscribe for more content like this, and I will see you in the next one.